This is Dyke Hendrickson. I am the host of Life Along the Merrimack. This is a weekly podcast. It's on every Tuesday. And in this half hour, we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. One of the things I'm doing in addition to the podcast is I'm writing a book called Life Along the Merrimack. And it is going to be out in about 6 months to a year, but I'm collecting photos. And from time to time, I like to show the photos just to give a feeling of what the river looks like and what I see when I go out. I take photos and I talk to people. I also talked to someone this week, a state representative, Christina Minicucci. She represents the area in Lawrence, Andover, North Andover, and Methuen. And she is one of the most ardent defenders of the river, trying to make it clean. She also was one of the voyagers last August. About 12 to 15 adventurous kayakers started in Franklin, New Hampshire, where the Merrimack River begins. And they came all the way down the Merrimack and finished right along where these fishermen are. It's 117 miles. Needless to say, it wasn't all done in one day. It took 4 days and 4 nights, of course, to sleep somewhere. And one thing interesting she mentioned to me is they had heavy rains there, really heavy. And so that is relevant to the Merrimack River because of this, what they call CSOs, combined sewage overflows. That means the runoff from the rainstorm goes into the sewage treatment plant because the pipes are mixed. The sewage treatment plant gets too much liquid there. It is part effluent waste and part rainwater, and it has to discharge the whole amount. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency knows about this. It occurs in Haverhill, Lowell, Lawrence, Manchester, other communities such as that. But this was an example where Christina said, we were really concerned about effluent and whatever, and yet when they were canoeing and this is kayaking, and this is above Lowell, so it's in New Hampshire, they didn't see a lot of signs of the effluent from Manchester, and some of them actually went into the river each evening. They've been canoeing for 8 or 10 hours. They're hot, they're sweating, and they just dunked in the river. So even though we hear the Merrimack River can be a bit dusky and can be, after many rainstorms, it can have a lot of effluent in it from these discharges. Some of the people said they went into the river, they had a great time. So anyway, Christina was one of those who was out on the water for all 4 days. And so that's an incredible thing. So she'll be part of my book talking about what the river means to her. Here are some fishermen, some on land. That's a point on Plum Island. Some of them are in vessels, and they're going for striped bass. In the old days, there was shad here. They were very large sturgeon, 5 to 6 feet, they say. But a lot of the fish disappeared because of the mills, and the mills started coming in Lowell in 1822, in Lawrence in about 1847, in Haverhill, and in Newburyport. So when they built the mills, they dammed the river. And when they dammed the river, the fish could not get upstream to their spawning grounds. But Newburyport is still a much favored fishing area. You can see how relaxing it might be to, put some bait in or have a plug on there and go fishing. This is a wonderful photo taken by Brian Eaton. He is a member of the Daily News photo staff. And a little about me, until a couple of years ago, I was with the Daily News, probably about 2012 to 2017. And so I covered a lot of things about the river, a lot of elements about the ocean. I got to know Brian, and this is one of his photos, and it's really well done. This is off of Salisbury Beach. Boaters see this, and campers, I suppose, see it. This is a postcard, of course. It's been there for well more than a century. Ben Butler was a political figure in Massachusetts, but he also was a general in the Union Army in the Civil War. And he lived in Newburyport for a period of time. But this is, it's not a lighthouse, of course, but this is a visual marker to show vessels how close they are coming to the shoals and, to stay away from Ben Butler's toothpick. And as I say, Butler was a general for the Union in the Civil War. He became very much hated in New Orleans. After New Orleans fell in the Civil War in about 1862 or 63, Butler took over as the Governor General of Louisiana, and they hated him because the women were not very friendly to Yankee soldiers once they arrived. They spit on them on occasion, would throw a drink at them on occasion. And Ben Butler started cracking down and said, the women are going to be kept off the streets if they can't be more civil. Actually, he said worse than that, but I won't go into it. They hated him in New Orleans. Nevertheless, the war ended, he ran for governor, and he was actually considered for president, and I'm thinking 1870, 1875, in that period of time. Ulysses Grant was in the White House, but Ben Butler's name came up. But this is a very well-known aspect of the river on the Salisbury side. Here is a photo also by Brian Eaton, and it underscores one of the elements that took place during the voyagers' trip. And to anyone who's been down the river, that there are many beautiful areas of the river. And it's not just up towards New Hampshire, but this is between Haverhill and Lawrence, I'm thinking. But you can see the river's beautiful, looks like early spring. The trees are quite magnificent, and Brian Eaton took this photo. And the river has been getting cleaner, actually. A century or two ago, the mills would put all their effluent, all their waste, everything directly into the river. And it used to be said that sometimes the river would be orange up near the mills because they were having orange dye that day. Sometimes it would be green because there was green dye that day. But it's no joke. The effluent went directly into the river. And it was one of the great turning points in history for the Merrimack Valley was in 1972 when the Clean Water Act was passed. Governor Ed Muskie, he was the governor of Maine, but this was senator at the time. Senator Ed Muskie was a leader in passing the Clean Water Act. Now, it is rather remarkable for people of the modern age, as we are, to think that even in the 50s and 60s, there was no real consciousness about cleaning the river or making the environment more accessible to animals, to birds, to fish, and that type of thing. In 1962, Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring, in which she talked about the much dangerous pesticides that were going into farmland, into areas near rivers, and it was having an effect of actually killing wildlife or making, for instance, bird eggs so thin that the egg would not stay whole, the birds would not hatch, and thus we were losing birds. The water, such as the Merrimack, was also damaged by pesticides that farmers might use, and it would run into the river after heavy rains or discharges from farmers' fields. So 1962, she had that book. She spoke in front of Congress, and she was kind of marginalized. I could, some of these old white legislators were kind of laughing at her and, as if to say, who cares about if a bird hatches or not? But she was a very brave woman. And she was able to get her point across. The other big event in the 60s, which led to the Clean Water Act, 1972, was in Ohio when the Cuyahoga River caught fire. I don't know if you're old enough, or perhaps you've seen photos of it since then, but a number of factories in Ohio were discharging their waste directly into the river in Ohio, the Cuyahoga, and it caught fire. And the thought of a river catching fire is a very bad thought. And so it was a situation where the photos got out all over the place, as you can guess. And there was much of an outcry because the industrialists and some of the owners of the large corporations in the country, poo-pooed the idea that rivers were that dirty and what did it matter. But it was very hard to deny that there's so much pollution in the river, so many toxics that the river caught fire. So Ed Muskie used this particular element, the fire on the river, to really push for a Clean Water Act. And I must say that it passed the House, it passed the Senate. This is 1972. President Nixon vetoed it, but it was passed over a veto. And so the Clean Water Act became official in 1972, and it was added onto and improved in 77 and then 82. And it kept moving forward. And so that's what really helped clean the Merrimack River. Very large $1 million grants were given to communities like Haverhill, Lawrence, and Lowell, and Manchester. Now, I should point out that it wasn't just the Merrimack. It included rivers in Maine, rivers in Virginia, rivers all along the East Coast, and many lakes. But this was a period of time that there was a very high consciousness about the environment, of cleaning up, because as I say, you could see the pollution. I grew up not in this area, but my doubles partner, a chap named Dick Canepa, an octogenarian who still lives in Newburyport. When he was a kid in the 50s, his mother would say, do not go near the river. And if you fall in, run right home and we'll put you in the bathtub. Because it was it was known to be very dirty. It was known to carry disease. I mean, who knows if it actually carried the disease? And it's still very important to have a clean river because more than 500,000 people in the Merrimack Valley still get their drinking water from the Merrimack River. It's one of the largest sources in New England for drinking water. Now, of course, the Merrimack water is clean, it's scientifically dealt with, but there always has to be a stress on cleanliness because people drink from the Merrimack. And I must say that one of the intriguing lessons I learned as I've been researching the book, which will be called Merrimack, Resilient River, is that through the 1880s, people in communities such as Lawrence got their drinking water from the river. It was treated, I will say, but not in a very scientific way. And so in 1890 or so, a number of young people in Lawrence died of typhoid fever. Now, the wealthier people in Lawrence lived away from the river and they had septic tanks, so they did not get their water from the river. The people near the river, the mill workers, the factory workers, got their water from the river, and several young people died, and there was quite a bit of sickness. And so the state commission convened in about 1890 and said, we cannot have children dying, and we suspect it could be the drinking water. So they created a commission, got a number of top-rate scientists, including several from MIT, who came up here. And so it was a situation that you had the best scientists in the country really working on a new method of cleaning the drinking water. And it was successful. And these MIT scientists, including several women actually, were really lauded for being able to make scientific improvements to cleaning the water. And so their solution was copied in other places on the Merrimack. and then throughout the country and even the world. So we think of the Merrimack River for having some firsts. It was the birthplace of the Coast Guard. It was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution through hydropower, meaning the mills in Lowell and Lawrence. And it is also a first for developing a science of clean drinking water. But here you can see a beautiful shot of the Merrimack River, and it's always good to learn new things. And recently I've learned that the University of Chicago did a study about 10 years ago. I think it went from 2007 to 2010, and found out, among other things, that young people who were swimming in the Merrimack River at that time had 15% more visits to the emergency room in Lawrence. Now, I've got to learn more about this, but as I say, it's University of Illinois at Chicago, and they had a study, and they went into emergency rooms, the one I'm referencing is in Lawrence, and found out that on a given weekend, with heavy rains, with big CSOs, as we've talked about, that's a discharge of effluent and rainwater, the visits to the emergency room increased 15%. And the study said that probably far more were actually sickened by going into the water, but didn't go to the emergency room. And, you can see that. The parents might say, are you feeling okay? Take a bath, take 2 aspirin, go to bed. But I have to learn more about this study. I just ran across it a few hours ago. And so I'm learning more, but I think there is still a concern about going swimming after these CSOs, these discharges of effluent goes into the Merrimack River. Got to be careful. This, I have pictures of the Chain Bridge, which goes from Amesbury to Newburyport. I will get them out in a more illustrative way, but I love this sign because bridges were a huge thing in the colonies. And so the Chain Bridge you can see here, the first bridge over the Merrimack, built 7 months under Timothy Palmer, rebuilt in 1828, maintained as toll bridge till 1868. 1909, it was built again by the commissioners of Essex County. So this is an interesting element. Our history of Newburyport, Salisbury, Amesbury, all these communities go way, way back. And in fact, Newbury was founded in 1635. In 1764, the waterside, as they call people who live near the Merrimack River, watersiders, they broke away from Newbury and then it became Newburyport. So there are 2 dates for it. 1635, the settling of Newbury, which at that time was mostly farms. And then as the river was built up, as shipbuilding took over, many people wanted to be away from Newbury because their interest was agriculture. And the interest of people close to the river was fishing and trade and shipbuilding. So in 1764, Newburyport became its own community. And it's a very large shipbuilding community, and we'll talk about that later. But I love this particular sign, and I see it often. Oh, there's my agent. Don't bother. As we said, this is Newburyport and Newbury, and the whole area is quite beautiful. This is part of Amesbury and Merrimack. As you can see, it's a town line. It's a beautiful area for kayaking, for fishing. And again, sometimes we are concerned that the Merrimack is polluted, which it does have its bad days after CSOs. But you can see how beautiful this is. And those kayakers and fishermen and a lot of different people enjoy the river each day. And people have asked me when I spoke, I used to speak to groups. Now with the element, we don't have it very much, but this just shows you how pretty it is. This looks like a random photo, and perhaps it is, but I was in Haverhill recently, and this is a self-described, it's an independent operation to clean the river. You probably can't read it, but it says Clean River Project. This is a chap named Rocky Morrison. He's in the stern here. And he goes around and really by himself. He's not part of a government agencies. He goes around, he gets beer cans out, he gets tires out of the river. I've seen him, get a truck and help bring cars out of the river. I mean, there used to be, and probably still are, automobiles at the bottom of the river. I've got to say, it's curious. Part of the river is so beautiful, and you think, my gosh, this is God's little acre. Parts of it really still have that problem. Anyway, Rocky is a fellow who on his own cleans up the river. Now, he does get funded from time to time from different city councils or town meetings. I saw him speak when I was with the Daily News. He spoke in front of the city council of Newburyport, was asking for money. And he falls into a strange niche, I must say. He's not, part of the government, and he's doing his own thing, as the expression goes. He does good work because he has photos to show that he cleans up the place. But here, when I was in Haverhill one day taking photos, he came along. He has a crew in the bow there. And so he's a good fellow, certainly well-meaning. Rocky Morrison is his name. And this is our final shot for the day. We're almost at the end of Life Along the Merrimack. As I say, I am Dyke Hendrickson. I'm the host of this podcast. Next week, actually, we're having a two-part special. The first is going to be Life Along the Merrimack. I'm going to show different slides about the history of the Merrimack and the expansion. And the second part, on August 4th, is going to be the history of the Coast Guard. Now, the history of the Coast Guard is important in Newburyport. Newburyport is the birthplace, and that was August 4th, 1790. So when we get to August 4th, 2020, in a couple weeks, we'll actually be celebrating the birthday of the Coast Guard right on this show. This is a beautiful shot of Amesbury by Brian Eaton as well. And I think this is near Lowell Boathouse, and they still make wooden boats of high quality. And I just thought this was so beautiful. Certainly it's one of the most picturesque areas of Amesbury, and shows, just the beauty of the river, churches in the background, residences in the background. And it looks like it was taken in the morning because it looks like it's shot from east to west. And so this is a wonderful photo. And I, feel very pleased that Brian Eaton of the Daily News has been making suggestions on photos. And this is one of them that I certainly appreciate. So that's it for me. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. This is Life Along the Merrimack. It's a weekly podcast. Next week, as part of a two-part presentation, we're going to have the history of the Merrimack River, and I have a lot of different historical slides. And then the following week, on August 4th, it'll be a history of the Coast Guard, because August 4th is the anniversary of the Coast Guard. So thank you for being with us. I look forward to some more presentations, and we're going to be talking about life along the Merrimack. So until next time we meet, I'm Dyke Hendrickson on this particular podcast, and I look forward to making presentations in coming weeks. Thank you.